Hello, it's Dr. Richard Venditti again, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about a summary of what we've learned this semester in the Sustainable Bioeconomy class. Just want to hit some of the high points of the course and really take-home points that are important. First thing I'll talk about is just the history of how humans have met their needs over the years. Humans have been around for 200,000 years or so, and what you can see in these graphs is that the population has really been spiking in the last 400 years or so. And what humans used for materials, what they needed thousands of years ago, it was biomaterials. It was wood. It was plants and animals and things like that, and they survived on that for a long time. And then maybe about 200 years ago, we started to discover fossil fuels and how to convert those nicely, and that became a very convenient way to get power and products, and that occurred in last 200 years or so. And what you can see from the graph on the inlet insert graph is that the effect of using those fossil fuels has correlated with increases in carbon dioxide and increases in average temperatures. And we have this hockey stick-like curve showing that about at the Industrial Revolution, things have changed with the climate quite a bit. That's a lot of carbon dioxide that's been put in the air from using fossil fuels. So right now, at this point, you can see with the population and the carbon dioxide and other burdens on the earth, we're at a crossroads. We need to understand and develop new ways to provide for society's needs without taxing the earth in the same way we're doing right now. And then the whole point of this course has been, okay, we have some possibilities for bioproducts and bioenergy to meet the needs, and how can we do that sustainably? When we talk about the bioeconomy, it's important that you think about three major parts of it. The first one is the biomass that we're growing and using in the bioeconomy. And you can see that picture of, that's a plantation forest. That's a forestry plantation where we're planting trees. And you can just imagine all the photosynthesis that's going on in that picture, where the plants are taking in carbon dioxide and producing biomass and releasing oxygen. It's amazing. Really important part to our earth. And then the second picture is of a biorefinery. You can see that they're complicated. They've got a lot of equipment. They're big. They're expensive. And on the other hand, they can be very effective in making different products for society. And then the final part on the right there, we see that there's lots of bioproducts that we use today, often in our lives. Simple things like paper and wood products, to bioethanol, and then to more advanced things like adhesives, textiles, plastics, polymers, even films for your telephone. So you can see there's these three parts of the bioeconomy are all important: the biomass supply side, the conversion side, and then the bioproduct side. All need more research and more development. The other thing we talked about in the class was the circular bioeconomy. Let's just kind of talk about it. It's driven by photosynthesis, so this is the power of the bioeconomy. We're taking carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, we're creating carbohydrates and other organic materials that we can use. And it could be through agricultural, aqua, or forestry practices. And then we are getting those biomass feedstocks, and then we are converting them through a process biorefining into bioproducts for society. And then finally, at the end of life of these bioproducts, we have waste. And what's so beautiful about bioproducts and the bioeconomy is that those wastes are compatible with the environment. If left in the soil, they will biodegrade, they will contribute to components that we need to live for the environment. They won't persist as litter in the environment. And so this is what we call the circular bioeconomy. It's a very powerful strategy that may address those questions and crises that we have at that crossroads that I was talking about. The other nice thing about it is we're minimizing our use of fossil carbon, which is a non-renewable resource, and we're preventing our large use of that. From the biorenewable resources standpoint, biomass, we can kind of look at forestry and agriculture as two of the major contributors to those biomasses. And one interesting thing is that the productivity of our forests and our farmlands are increasing. And you can see right for both of these, from 1940 to 2000, there's been significant improvements in the efficiency in how we use land to produce either corn or trees. This is going to be an important part of the equation to address some of the issues that we're facing now with high population and high society demand. So the other thing we talked about in the class was why bioenergy and bioproducts. What are some of the driving forces? Well, the first one we talked about was the circular bioeconomy and environmental quality we can improve. National security is another one, and I'm showing this graph again that shows that of the consumption of oil in the United States, only 50% of it is produced in the U.S., and about 50% is imported. So, of course, during times of struggle or conflict, we're going to be looking to see if we have secure sources for fuels and products. We also have excess agricultural production lands and rural areas that we want to develop and use to the benefit of the United States. We already talked about a little bit about compatibility with the environment, and I'm showing a picture there on the bottom of plastic, synthetic plastics that are oil derived, and how they persist in the environment and stay as litter. I just looked at a study, and this study found that there's a preponderance of plastic particles inside a human body in the digestive tract, and so these plastics don't just affect wildlife and scenery, but they're actually going to affect our health. And then bioenergy and bioproducts create good jobs and products that society needs. Another important thing about the bioeconomy is what it's doing is if we can make bioproducts valuable, then the biomass to make those products will be valuable too. And if the biomass is valuable, then more people or society will decide to maintain their lands either as forest or rural areas. This is important because these forests and rural areas provide such important ecosystem services to us. They help us help the environment. There's cultural and leisure activities that we really can benefit from. And then there's also all the products for society that if we can take these sustainably off the land, we've got a win-win-win situation. So we talk about a biorefinery, and I think it's important to kind of touch on that again. All those little dots that you see on the left-hand side of the slide are actually unit operations in a biorefinery. And what you can see is that these biorefineries they're big, they're complicated, they're complex. There's lots of challenges and lots of conversions that are going on to convert biomass from bioproducts. So it's going to take engineers and scientists and all kinds of other employees in order to keep a biorefinery running. On the right, we see a list of some of the bioproducts that can be made from a biorefinery. And if I just kind of focus in on a wood processing plant, you could imagine that one single biorefinery could produce some wood products like lumber or plywood. The residue from that could actually be used to make wood strands for oriented strand boards or other types of composite wood materials. We could even use some of the sawdust and other wastes from the wood processing into making pellets. Oftentimes when we make lumber, the the parts of the wood that have been cut away from the straight boards and things are made into chips, and those chips are sent to pulp and paper mills. At that pulp and paper mill, we have multiple products that we can make. So we can make paper that society needs. We also, at a paper mill, can make soap. We can make turpentine. We can make resins for adhesives. We oftentimes actually make green electricity. So the material that we have to dissolve away when we make the paper, that gets burned in a recovery boiler, and we make steam and then electricity. And this is a green, renewable electricity that is useful for our society. The products that we make, bioproducts can be a lot of different things, from pharmaceuticals to food additives to fibers, coatings, superabsorbents, bioplastics. All of these things can be made from biomass, and it's really exciting to think about the different products that can be made and how they can serve society. When we think about developing these bioproducts, we always have to think about, okay, how valued are they? What are the selling prices? And we also need to think about what is the production volume. So when developing and designing biorefineries, we always ask ourselves, okay, what can we sell for what price, and how much of it potentially can we sell? These are very important questions for making a successful biorefinery. Now, the bioeconomy isn't all perfect. We know that there's many challenges. I just kind of list some here that are important ones that we already touched on in the class, but really, the fact that biomass is low density and usually is solid puts it at a slight disadvantage from oil and other liquids that are non-renewable or gases. It's harder to transport, harder to store, harder to move around. The other thing about biomass is its low energy density. So again, transport, we're going to have some significant transport in order to get the same amount of energy for, let's say, making a biofuel. Then the other thing about the biomass that we're using is that it's biologically active and moisture sensitive. So we need to really worry about how we store it and how rain or other sources of water might impact its water content. The other thing is it's plant material, it's natural material, and it's variable composition. So biomass in itself can vary, even if it's the same type like corn, depending on the geography, the weather conditions, soil types, things like that. So that's a little bit more of a challenge than just taking oil that's a little bit more standard. And then the other thing about it is biomass and harvesting of this biomass is susceptible to weather events. Strong winters, hurricanes, rains, drought, all of these things can impact the bioeconomy. And if you think about it, as we look at global warming, and there's some concerns about how stable the weather is going to be, how are droughts going to occur, are there going to be more frequent hurricanes, tornadoes, and things like that. That's also going to be a tough part of the puzzle that will challenge us. To be very blunt, the cost also of bioproducts and bioenergy is a significant hurdle. And I'm just showing here an example where we compare paper and plastic grocery bags. And for 1,000 grocery bags, you can see that the cost for paper bags about $230. The cost for plastic is $35. We have to recognize that oil and the oil refinery business is very mature. The oil that we take has got a lot of advantages in that it's liquid, it's high density, all these things, and we can make products for society from oil in a very convenient and cheap way. And so the competition with the bioproducts is tough. So in order to have bioproducts compete, there has to be two things. We have to either lower the price of the bioproducts, or we have to have other advantages of the bioproducts, for instance, the biodegradability that people or society are willing to pay for. but this is a huge challenge for bioproducts. So, the success of the bioeconomy and us using bioproducts depends on it being sustainable. And you can see that there's a lot of things that go into it being sustainable. We've talked about economic, environmental, and social sustainability. All these things have to happen for bioproducts for them to be successful. We also need to have good governance. And so, developing the global bioeconomy it's going to hinge on all of those pillars of sustainability. On the left-hand part of the slide, I just mentioned some of the skills and tools and jobs that are necessary for the bioeconomy. And you can see that if you're interested in helping the environment and developing bioproducts, and you have an interest in, let's say, financial or engineering, there's all these dimensions that can fit into the bioeconomy, and I would encourage you all to explore them. The three topics that are under asterisks are actually will be topics in upcoming courses that we will teach distance education, and I encourage you to look out for these courses if you have an interest. So in conclusion, I want to thank you for your attention and your participation and your interest in this area, and I just kind of want to welcome you, if ever you can, come to NC State or interact with us through questions or anything. We're really looking forward to staying connected. Thank you very much.